Have you ever woken up after heartbreak that morning when the world feels too quiet, the air too heavy, and even breathing feels like work? In this video, I'll take you through that morning, the one after pain, and how I slowly learned to rebuild my heart through something unexpected. Speaking English. This isn't just about language. It's about healing, hope, and finding your voice again, one word at a time. The empty morning. That morning, Denmark looked different. The light through my window felt too sharp, like it was cutting through everything I didn't want to see. My phone was silent. The city outside, calm, peaceful, somehow made the emptiness inside me louder. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, wondering how a place so full of life could feel so completely hollow. You know that strange space after heartbreak, when your body is awake but your soul is still sleeping? That was me. My thoughts moved in slow motion. Even brushing my teeth felt pointless. The air smelled the same, the street looked the same, but something invisible had collapsed. It wasn't the world that changed, it was me, or maybe the part of me that still believed everything would stay the same forever. In Denmark, mornings are quiet. You can hear birds, distant bicycles, soft footsteps on cold pavement. That day, every sound was like an echo of something I'd lost. I remember thinking, maybe I'll never feel normal again. But deep down, another voice whispered, you will, just not today. When you go through heartbreak, your brain actually goes into withdrawal. Scientists say the same regions that light up for love also light up for addiction. So when love ends, your brain feels like it's been cut off from its drug. That's why even simple things like getting out of bed hurt. You're not weak, you're chemically grieving. That morning I realized something both sad and comforting. Healing doesn't start with strength. It starts with surrender, the moment you stop pretending you're okay. So I sat there watching the Danish sunlight crawl across the floor. And I didn't move. I didn't fix anything. I just let the silence be heavy. And for the first time, I let myself feel everything without rushing to escape. Maybe that's where healing begins, not in doing but in allowing. Allowing the emptiness, the confusion, the ache, and still breathing through it. Because even when the heart breaks, the morning still comes. Silence hurts louder. There's a strange kind of noise that only silence can make. After the heartbreak, it followed me everywhere. In the kitchen, in the shower, even during my walks through the quiet streets of Copenhagen. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that hums behind your thoughts, reminding you of every word you'll never hear again. You see, silence after love isn't empty. It's crowded. It's filled with unsent messages, half-remembered voices, and all the things you wish you'd said. I used to think silence was calm. But in that season of my life, silence was chaos wearing a polite smile. First, I tried to drown it out, with music, podcasts, even the sound of my own footsteps on the cobblestones. But nothing worked. Because here's the truth. You can't outwalk the voice that lives inside your chest. The more you run from it, the louder it gets. Psychologists say our brains hate unfinished stories. When a relationship ends without closure, your mind loops the same memories, trying to rewrite the ending. That's why silence feels unbearable. It's your brain begging for answers that no longer exist. One morning, I caught myself whispering into the quiet, "Are you still thinking about me too?" The question hung in the air like fog. Of course, there was no reply. But strangely, that whisper, that small shaky sound, broke something open. It was the first time I'd spoken out loud since the breakup. The first time I'd chosen sound over silence. And that changed everything. Because silence may hurt, but it also leaves room for a new voice to grow. Your OWA in Denmark. They say still taler. Silence speaks. I began to understand that. Maybe silence wasn't punishing me. Maybe it was teaching me to listen, not to the past but to the quiet parts of myself that I'd ignored for too long. That day I didn't play music. I didn't scroll through my phone. I just let the silence talk back. And for the first time it didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like space, the kind you need before you can start again. The coffee I couldn't drink. There's something oddly tragic about an untouched cup of coffee. That morning mine sat on the table, perfectly warm, perfectly still, and completely impossible to swallow. It wasn't the taste. It was the memory. Because that same cup, that same cafe in Aarhus used to be our place. I stared at the coffee for 10 minutes. Maybe 20. The smell reminded me of mornings when laughter came easily, when we talked about future trips, when the world still made sense. Now it was just liquid proof that life had moved on without asking for permission. You ever notice how grief hides in small, ordinary things? Not in the big moments but in the everyday ones, a cup, a chair, a smell. That's how heartbreak works. It sneaks into the simple, so healing has to begin there too. A Danish friend once told me, "You can't rush coffee. You have to drink it slowly, or it punishes you." Maybe heartbreak is the same. I wanted to gulp my sadness down fast just to be done with it. But pain doesn't dissolve that way. It lingers until you taste it. One careful sip at a time. So that's what I did. I took one sip. Just one. It didn't make me feel better. But it made me feel present. The bitterness of the coffee matched the bitterness in my chest. And somehow that felt honest. Maybe healing doesn't start when things get sweet again. Maybe it starts when you can finally handle the bitter without running away. There's a term in psychology called exposure therapy. It means facing what hurts little by little, until your brain learns it won't kill you. That cup of coffee, as silly as it sounds, was my therapy. I faced the place, the memory, the taste, and survived. And survival, even in its smallest form, is the beginning of strength. By the time I left the cafe, the coffee was gone. The ache wasn't. But it felt lighter, not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd faced it and lived to tell the story. That night I wrote in my journal, "Maybe tomorrow I'll drink it without crying." Talking to myself in English started as a joke. One night, sitting alone in my tiny Danish apartment, I whispered to myself in English, "So, how are we doing tonight?" I sounded ridiculous. My voice echoed in the empty kitchen and I laughed. But that laugh, that soft, shaky sound, felt like a small act of rebellion against the silence. I didn't plan to turn it into practice. Just happened. Every night I'd talk to myself about random things. How the weather was, what I cooked for dinner, why I still checked my phone. At first it felt awkward, like pretending to be someone else. But slowly it became therapy disguised as language learning. You know what's funny? When you speak in another language, your thoughts change shape. Your pain gets translated too. In English, I could say things that felt too heavy in my mother tongue. "I miss you" became, "I'm learning to be okay." Same feeling, different energy. Psychologists call this emotional reframing, using new words to reshape old emotions. When we describe our pain differently, our brain begins to process it differently too. And that's what English did for me. It gave me distance. It turned heartbreak into dialogue instead of disaster. Soon I began recording voice notes. I'd listen to them later, correcting pronunciation, laughing at my mistakes. But here's what I realized. The grammar wasn't what mattered. It was the act of speaking again, of giving sound to my thoughts. Every sentence was proof that I was still alive. Sometimes I'd say things like, "You're doing fine," or "It's okay to start slow." And even though I knew it was me talking to myself, it strangely worked. Because hearing kindness, even in your own voice, rewires the way you feel about yourself. Learning English became more than vocabulary. It became a mirror, one where I could see a version of myself who hadn't given up yet. One night, I caught my reflection while speaking. My eyes looked tired but alive. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just learning a language. I was learning to talk myself back to life. Why English healed me. It took me a while to understand why speaking English helped me heal. At first, I thought it was just distraction, something to keep my brain busy while my heart caught up. But the truth was deeper. English didn't just distract me from pain. It gave me a new lens to see it. You see, every language carries its own emotional rhythm. In my native tongue, every word of love felt sharp and close, like touching a wound that hadn't closed. But in English, everything felt a little softer, more spacious. I could talk about heartbreak without collapsing under it. When I said, "I'm sad," instead of the heavier words from my first language, it was like whispering to myself from a safer distance. I wasn't lying. I was just giving my pain a different shape, one I could hold without breaking. There's a fascinating psychological fact about this. When bilingual people describe emotional experiences in their second language, the emotional intensity actually decreases. It's like an emotional filter. You still feel, but it doesn't burn as much. And in that gentler space, healing can finally begin. So every time I spoke English, I was doing emotional surgery on myself, quietly, word by word. I wasn't trying to erase what happened. I was learning to rewrite it in softer tones. English became my emotional safety net. A place where I could make mistakes, stutter, and still be understood, even if only by myself. And isn't that what healing really is? Learning to understand yourself again after chaos. When people talk about language learning, they often focus on fluency. But fluency to me became something deeper, the ability to speak truth without fear. And English gave me that courage. It allowed me to rebuild confidence, not because I sounded perfect, but because I dared to keep talking even when my voice trembled. And I realized one simple truth. Sometimes healing doesn't come from silence but from speaking, even if your sentences are broken. Because broken words, just like broken hearts, still carry meaning. Tiny wins, real progress. Healing rarely feels like a victory. It's not fireworks or applause. It's brushing your teeth again, replying to a message, walking outside without your heart racing. For me, it was saying 3 full sentences in English without stopping. That tiny moment felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. At first, my progress looked invisible. My pronunciation was clumsy, my grammar inconsistent. But I kept going. Every night, I'd sit by the window repeating phrases like, "I am okay," or "Today was hard but I survived." Simple words, but each one felt like a small brick rebuilding the walls inside me. It's strange, isn't it? We crave big breakthroughs, yet it's the smallest actions that save us. Neuroscientists call this microprogress. When your brain notices even a tiny win, it releases dopamine, the chemical of motivation. That's why saying one correct sentence can feel unexpectedly good. It's your brain saying, "See? You're not stuck. You're moving." In Denmark, I noticed how people appreciate small joys. A warm light in winter, a cup of tea, a conversation that lasts longer than planned. Maybe that's why this country taught me patience. Feeling like learning isn't supposed to be rushed. Some nights I'd listen to my recordings and laugh at my awkward pauses. Other nights I'd cry halfway through a sentence. But every attempt mattered. The point wasn't perfection, it was persistence. And the funny thing about persistence is this: it quietly builds self-respect. When you show up for yourself day after day, even when no one is watching, your brain starts to trust you again. One evening, while walking by the Aarhus harbor, I caught myself thinking in English naturally without effort. That moment stopped me. Not because my English was perfect, but because it meant something bigger. I had changed. My mind was adapting, expanding, living again. Tiny wins, real progress. That's how healing hides. Not in dramatic transformations, but in the quiet proof that you kept going. Because every time you choose to continue, even a little, you remind your heart we're still alive. The day I smiled again. It didn't happen on a special day. There were no flowers, no dramatic music, no sudden realization that I was over it. It was just another gray Danish morning, cold, quiet, and completely ordinary. I was walking to the bus stop, listening to myself reading an English story out loud. I stumbled over a word. Throughout. I mispronounced it so badly that it sounded like throat. I stopped, laughed, and then realized I was laughing that it caught me off guard. The sound felt foreign, like hearing my own voice for the first time in months. But it was real. That laugh cracked open something inside me that had been frozen since the breakup. You see, healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in during moments when you're too busy living to notice. Sometimes it's hidden in a laugh, a conversation, or even a mispronounced word. That day I didn't feel completely better, but I felt lighter. And lightness after darkness feels like a miracle. There's a psychological concept called emotional reactivation. It's when your brain starts to allow positive emotions again after trauma. It's not instant. It's a gradual reopening. Like thawing ice, slow, uneven, but unstoppable. That smile was my first thaw. Later that day, I went to my favorite cafe again. The same one from before, the coffee I couldn't drink. I ordered the same thing, sat at the same table. But this time I didn't feel haunted. The place hadn't changed. As I stirred the coffee, I whispered in English, "You made it." I didn't even plan to say it. It just slipped out naturally. 2 words, but they carried a whole journey inside them. And maybe that's what growth looks like. Not forgetting the past, but learning to sit with it peacefully. When I left the cafe, I smiled again. Not because life was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time it felt possible. Because the day you can laugh at your own brokenness, that's the day you've already started to heal. How to rebuild your heart. They say time heals everything, but I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal, you do. Time only gives you space to rebuild, if you're brave enough to start. For me, that rebuilding didn't begin with another person, or even with forgiveness. It began with words, slow, simple English words that helped me put myself back together. When you go through heartbreak, your heart doesn't just break, your identity does too. You forget who you are without the other person. Learning English became my quiet rebellion against that loss. Every new word was a reminder that I could still grow, still learn, still begin again. In psychology, there's something called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through new experiences. Every time I practiced English, my brain wasn't just learning a language. It was literally rebuilding connections, emotional, mental, even spiritual. That's what healing looks like on the inside. Your brain choosing life again, one small spark at a time. Some nights I still felt lonely, but I started to realize that loneliness isn't always an enemy. Sometimes it's the teacher that hands you back your own voice. I used to fear it. Now I sit with it, in quiet Danish evenings watching the lights flicker on across the city, and I listen. Rebuilding your heart doesn't mean erasing the past. It means using the pieces to create something wiser, softer, more open. And that's what I did, not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. Now, when I speak English, it's not just about language anymore. It's a reminder of everything I survived. Each sentence carries proof that I was broken once and I built myself again, word by word, day by day. So if you're watching this, sitting in your own silence, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, you will. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But one day you'll wake up, speak a few words out loud and realize, this voice is mine again. And that will be your morning after pain.